I still can't believe what happened at Metobrook Wildlife Center last Saturday. I was doing my usual educational presentation with my red-tailed hawk, Artemis, when this woman in designer athleisure marched up with her toddler and demanded, not asked, demanded, that her precious little Brandon pet my apex predator. The way she said it, you'd think I was denying her kid access to a fluffy bunny at a petting zoo, not a bird of prey with talons that could puncture a leather glove like tissue paper. My name is Nathan Forrester, and I've been a licensed falconer and wildlife educator for 12 years. Every weekend, I volunteer at our local wildlife center in Pine Valley, California, bringing rehabilitated birds of prey to teach families about raptor conservation. Artemis is my educational ambassador, a magnificent female red-tailed hawk with a 4-foot wingspan who was rescued after a car strike left her partially blind in one eye. She can't be released back to the wild, but she's perfect for controlled educational settings. Well, usually controlled. The woman who would turn my peaceful Saturday into a viral nightmare was Rebecca Thornton, age 38, president of the Pine Valley Elementary PTA and self-appointed queen of all she surveyed. I'd seen her type before, the kind who treats minimum wage workers like servants and thinks a $200 yoga mat makes her enlightened. She approached my demonstration area, dragging her 4-year-old son behind her like a designer handbag. Her perfectly contoured face was already set in an expression of entitlement that made my stomach drop. I was in the middle of explaining to a group of fascinated kids how hawks use their incredible eyesight to spot prey from hundreds of feet in the air when Rebecca's voice cut through my presentation like nails on a chalkboard. She announced, in a tone that suggested she was granting me a tremendous honor, that her Brandon simply adored birds and would now be petting mine. Not, could he pet, not, may he pet, but, would be petting, as if the matter was already decided. I politely explained that Artemis was a wild animal, not a pet, and that for everyone's safety, including Brandon's, no one was allowed to touch her. I even pointed to the large sign next to my demonstration area that clearly stated in bold letters, "Danger. Wild animal. Do not touch. Observe from safe distance." Rebecca looked at the sign, then at me, then back at the sign as if it had personally offended her entire bloodline. Her response was to inform me, in an increasingly shrill voice, that I clearly didn't understand who she was. She was Rebecca Thornton, and her husband owned 3 car dealerships. Her Brandon was gifted, exceptional, and had never been told no in his life because that would stifle his creativity. She actually used the phrase stifle his creativity about petting a hawk. She then launched into a lecture about how I was discriminating against children and creating a hostile learning environment. I tried to remain professional, explaining that hawks are apex predators with incredibly powerful talons designed to kill prey instantly. Artemis might be trained, but she was still wild at heart, and any sudden movement could trigger her hunting instincts. I showed them the thick leather gauntlet I wore, pointing out the deep gouges from her talons, explaining that even through this protection, I sometimes felt the pressure of her grip. Rebecca's face turned an alarming shade of red as she accused me of fear-mongering and trying to make myself seem important by keeping her child from a simple interaction with nature. She actually said, and I quote, that I was gatekeeping wildlife experiences and perpetuating toxic masculinity by implying her Brandon couldn't handle a little bird. A little bird, she called a red-tailed hawk a little bird. The crowd that had gathered for my presentation was now watching our exchange with a horrified fascination usually reserved for car crashes. Several parents were actively pulling their children back, while others had their phones out, clearly sensing that something memorable was about to happen. One dad actually mouthed, "Good luck," to me before stepping further away. That's when Rebecca decided to take matters into her own hands. While I was distracted, trying to calm Artemis, who was getting agitated by the raised voices, Rebecca grabbed Brandon's wrist and lunged forward, trying to force his hand toward Artemis' chest. She moved so fast I barely had time to react, yanking the hawk's jesses to pull her away while simultaneously trying to block Rebecca with my body. Artemis exploded into action. She spread her wings to their full span, letting out a shriek that could be heard across the entire wildlife center. Her talons gripped my glove so hard I felt them through the leather, and she began baiting, the falconry term for when a bird tries to fly while tethered. The force nearly pulled me off balance, and I had to use both hands to control her while Rebecca continued advancing, dragging poor Brandon, who was now crying in terror. The situation escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. Rebecca was screaming that I was being dramatic, that I had trained the bird to act aggressive to make myself look heroic. She accused me of traumatizing her child while literally dragging the sobbing boy toward a panicking raptor. Other parents were shouting at her to stop, but she seemed completely oblivious to anything but her own narrative. One mother yelled that she was going to get her child killed, while a father threatened to call 911 if she didn't back away immediately. The chaos was attracting attention from all over the wildlife center. I could see staff members running toward us, and 2 security guards were pushing through the growing crowd. Meanwhile, Artemis was in full defensive mode, mantling with her wings spread and her mouth open, making the distinctive hissing sound hawks make when threatened. Rebecca's response to the mounting criticism was to double down. She began ranting about how everyone was overreacting, how she knew better than some 20-something bird handler, I'm 34, by the way, and how this was exactly the problem with society today, too many rules, too much coddling, not enough hands-on learning. She actually used the phrase, helicopter society, while trying to force her child to pet a bird of prey. The security guards finally reached us and immediately placed themselves between Rebecca and Artemis. One of them, a retired police officer named Dale, took one look at the situation and radioed for backup. Rebecca turned her fury on him, demanding his badge number. He was private security, not police, and threatening to have him fired for interfering with her parental rights. While she was distracted arguing with security, I managed to get Artemis hooded. For those unfamiliar with falconry, a hood is a leather cap that covers a bird's eyes and instantly calms them. The moment the hood was on, Artemis relaxed, though I could feel her heart racing through her chest feathers. My own hands were shaking from the adrenaline, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. Rebecca saw me hood Artemis and started screaming that I was abusing the animal, that she was going to report me to PETA, the Humane Society, and someone she called the bird police. She pulled out her phone and started filming me, narrating to her camera that she had caught me torturing a helpless bird. Several people in the crowd immediately corrected her, explaining that hooding was a standard, humane falconry practice. The situation reached peak absurdity when Rebecca demanded that the security guards arrest me for animal abuse and child endangerment. When they politely explained that they couldn't arrest anyone and that she was the one who had endangered her child, she threatened to sue the wildlife center, me personally, and, somehow, inexplicably, the hawk. She actually said she would sue the hawk. That's when Emma Chen, the wildlife center's director, arrived with 2 sheriff's deputies. Emma is 5 feet 2 inches, soft-spoken, and has the patience of a saint, but I could see her jaw clenching as she surveyed the scene. She asked me if I wanted to press charges for harassment and interference with a wildlife education program. Before I could answer, Rebecca made the decision for me. She grabbed Brandon again and made one more lunge toward Artemis, screaming that this was America and she had rights. The deputies immediately intervened, one of them catching her arm while the other positioned himself protectively in front of Brandon. The child was hysterical at this point, begging his mom to leave the scary bird alone, which seemed to penetrate Rebecca's fury for the first time. The deputies explained that she was being detained for endangering a minor, her own child, and interfering with a licensed wildlife educator. Rebecca's response was to demand their badge numbers, threaten lawsuits, and insist that her husband would have their jobs. She threw around the phrase, unlawful detention, a lot for someone who had just tried to force a toddler to touch a federally protected raptor. As they were escorting her away, Rebecca spotted someone in the crowd filming and shouted that she was being persecuted for being a concerned mother. She claimed I had lured her child close to the bird and then made it attack them for attention. The crowd's collective eye roll was almost audible, and several people immediately offered to provide witness statements to the deputies. The aftermath came swiftly. By that evening, the video was all over social media with titles like, Karen tries to force kid to pet hawk, chaos ensues, and world's worst mom versus bird of prey. The Wildlife Center's Facebook page was flooded with supportive messages, and someone started a GoFundMe for Artemis veterinary care that raised $3,000 in 2 hours, though she didn't need any medical attention. The legal consequences for Rebecca were substantial. The district attorney charged her with child endangerment, a misdemeanor that carried up to 6 months in jail. She was also charged with harassment and disturbing a lawful assembly. The Wildlife Center banned her for life and filed a restraining order preventing her from coming within 500 feet of any of their educational events. But the real consequences came from the court of public opinion. The video went viral on TikTok, where someone set her meltdown to dramatic music and added subtitles highlighting her most ridiculous quotes. The "I'll sue the hawk" line became a meme. Her husband's car dealership started getting 1-star reviews from people who'd never been to California, and the Pine Valley Elementary PTA held an emergency meeting. 3 days after the incident, I received a call from Emma telling me that Rebecca's husband had contacted the Wildlife Center. He wanted to apologize on his wife's behalf and make a substantial donation to our education program. He also mentioned that Rebecca had been asked to resign from the PTA and that they were seeking professional help for her anxiety and control issues. The criminal case proceeded quickly. Rebecca's lawyer tried to argue that she was simply an overprotective mother trying to give her child an educational experience, but the video evidence was damning. Multiple witnesses testified that I had clearly explained the safety rules and that Rebecca had deliberately ignored them. The judge was particularly unimpressed by her claim that a federally protected bird of prey was no different from a parakeet. In her sentencing hearing 6 weeks later, Rebecca stood before Judge Patricia Hoffman, still maintaining that everyone had overreacted. The judge disagreed. She sentenced Rebecca to 300 hours of community service, specifically at animal shelters, where she would learn proper animal handling and respect under supervision. She was also fined $8,000 in order to complete a parenting class focused on child safety. The judge's final words were particularly cutting. She told Rebecca that her entitled behavior had not only endangered her own child but had risked the life of a protected species and could have resulted in the euthanization of Artemis if she had attacked in self-defense. Rebecca finally seemed to grasp the gravity of what she'd done, bursting into tears as the judge announced that failure to complete her sentence would result in 90 days in county jail.